December 17, 1944, near Stavelot, Belgium. The fuel gauge read empty, but Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper of Kampfgruppe Peiper, 1st SS Panzer Division, already knew that. Through his commander's periscope, he watched American trucks streaming past on a distant road, each one burning more fuel in an hour than his entire battalion could hope to capture in a week. Fuel. It had become the true currency of war. Steel could be forged, men could be trained, guns could be built, but without gasoline, they were useless. The Wehrmacht, once a juggernaut of blitzkrieg, now relied on horse-drawn wagons. Its mighty tanks often sat immobile not from enemy fire, but from thirst. The Ardennes offensive, Hitler's last gamble in the West, was meant to split the Allies, capture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. But beneath the grand strategy lay a far more desperate truth. The operation was a fuel raid disguised as a battle plan. German commanders knew it. Their soldiers knew it. Even Peiper himself admitted privately, "We have fuel for 60 miles. If we don't capture more, we stop." On December 16, 1944, the offensive roared to life. In the pre-dawn darkness, thousands of guns lit the sky, hurling shells into American lines. Waves of infantry surged forward, and at the spearhead, Peiper's armored column thundered westward. 117 tanks, 149 half-tracks, 600 vehicles. Yet behind that roar lurked fragility. Each Tiger II tank consumed 5 gallons per mile. Every advance ticked away precious fuel that could never be replaced. The German plan hinged on surprise. If Peiper could capture Allied fuel depots intact, the drive might continue. If not, the offensive would die in the forests of the Ardennes. For Peiper, gasoline was more valuable than territory, more vital than victory itself. At dawn on December 17th, his column struck gold. Near the village of Hunsfeld, they overran an American supply depot. Trucks, jeeps, drums, over 50,000 gallons of fuel fell into German hands. Soldiers cheered. Drivers siphoned gas by the bucket. For a fleeting moment, hope returned. A sergeant recorded in his diary, "For the first time in days, our engines sing with strength." But the triumph was deceptive. 50,000 gallons could power the advance for perhaps 24 hours. Beyond that, silence awaited. Peiper pressed forward, eyes fixed westward, toward the Meuse River and the fuel depots beyond. The Americans, however, had learned bitter lessons in North Africa and Normandy. They understood the value of fuel. At Stavelot, engineers dynamited storage tanks, sending 2.5 million gallons of gasoline up in flames. Columns of black smoke towered above the snow, visible for miles. To Peiper's men, it was as if the sky itself mocked them. The contrast was staggering. For the Germans, 50,000 gallons captured at Hansfeld was salvation. For the Americans, 2.5 million destroyed at Stavelot was an acceptable sacrifice. Eisenhower himself ordered, "Destroy every drop. Deny them fuel." Every mile became a race against the fuel gauge. At Trois Ponts, Peiper's men reached another depot, 1.1 million gallons. They found it already burning, set alight by retreating Americans. Flames roared, fuel tanks boiled, and gasoline ran like rivers into the snow. Desperate crews tried to pump what they could, but Allied fighter bombers swooped overhead, shredding trucks and scattering men. Out of millions of gallons, only scraps were saved. By December 18th, Peiper's spearhead was stalled again. His tanks, once symbols of unstoppable might, now sat like stranded beasts. A Tiger II that could crush any Sherman was powerless without fuel. Peiper wired higher command. "Fuel critical. Without immediate resupply, advance cannot continue." The reply was cold. "No reserves available. Seize enemy stocks." But enemy stocks were being destroyed faster than they could be reached. American commanders, understanding their advantage, ordered fuel depots blown up at the first sign of German approach. Engineers became as vital as infantry, demolitions as decisive as artillery. Meanwhile, the Americans themselves seemed unburdened by scarcity. The Red Ball Express, a vast convoy system of 6,000 trucks, hauled fuel around the clock from French ports to the front. Each truck consumed 40 gallons a day, more than a German company received in a week. Yet for the Allies, the arithmetic worked. American refineries produced 1.8 billion barrels in 1944. Germany, reliant on synthetic plants, produced barely a fraction. Peiper's men could see the disparity with their own eyes. Captured American vehicles carried jerry cans stacked like firewood. GIs lit cigarettes with gasoline-soaked rags. To the fuel-starved Germans, it was unthinkable extravagance. By nightfall, reality closed in. German tanks began running dry. Crews abandoned them in ditches, removing bolts and firing pins to keep them from Allied hands. Infantry marched past the hulks, boots crunching in the snow, their supposed armored support now little more than steel carcasses. Still, Peiper drove forward. He believed, perhaps foolishly, that one more depot might tip the balance. His officers muttered otherwise. One whispered, "We fight not against the Americans, but against their fuel," another replied. "Then we are already defeated." The Ardennes offensive had been conceived as a bold strike to split the Allies. But in truth, it was a desperate gamble for fuel. Every burning depot, every abandoned tank, every empty jerry can told the same story. The Reich was running on fumes, and as the snow deepened and the skies cleared, the Germans would learn that courage, steel, and sacrifice meant little in the age of industrial war. Against an enemy with oceans of oil, their advance was doomed before it began. December 19th, 1944. The village of Stoumont echoed with the roar of tank engines and the thunder of artillery. Kampfgruppe Peiper, once the razor-sharp spearhead of the German advance, now sputtered forward like a flame about to die. Fuel gauges sank lower with every mile, every skirmish. Tanks were abandoned not from enemy fire, but from empty tanks. Inside his command vehicle, Peiper studied the maps with weary eyes. The Meuse River lay tantalizingly close, 30 kilometers away. Yet his fuel supply was down to fumes. Reports from officers confirmed the grim reality. Perhaps 8,000 gallons remained. Enough to fight one battle, enough to retreat, or enough to attempt neither and be destroyed in place. The Americans, meanwhile, moved with a freedom that mocked his desperation. At Bastogne, surrounded paratroopers were resupplied not with hope, but with fuel. On December 18th, C-47 transports dropped 160,000 gallons to the embattled 101st Airborne, an air delivery larger than Peiper's entire reserve. To the Wehrmacht, such a figure represented months of allocations. To the Americans, it was a single day's emergency measure. The contrast grew sharper with every passing hour. On December 20th, word reached Peiper that a fuel convoy intended for his column had been destroyed by Allied fighter bombers. The message was curt. "No resupply possible. Continue with available resources," his officers gathered. Werner Pötschke, blunt as always, said, "We have fuel for 20 kilometers. The Meuse is 30. Silence filled the room. Peiper himself admitted what none wished to speak aloud. "Gentlemen, we are fighting an enemy who can afford to burn more fuel to deny us than we receive for an entire operation. What we celebrated at Hansfeld was nothing to them. We cannot win." At Trois Ponts, another American depot went up in flames, 1.1 million gallons turned to smoke. At Spa, 2.5 million more. By week's end, American engineers had destroyed over 8 million gallons, rather than risk capture, more than Germany allocated to the entire Ardennes offensive. To the Americans, destruction was strategy. To the Germans, it was incomprehensible waste. The Red Ball Express never ceased. 6,000 trucks rumbled ceaselessly over frozen French roads, burning 40 gallons each per day. The operation itself consumed more gasoline than German Army Group B received monthly, yet the trucks rolled on, delivering 20,000 tons daily, including thousands of tons of fuel. Colonel James Snyder recorded calmly in his diary, "Fuel receipts yesterday 1.8 million gallons. Issued 1.6 million. Net gain 200,000 gallons." Even in the middle of the largest battle on the Western Front, American reserves grew. December 21st brought disaster. Peiper's tanks, battered and half-empty, faced encirclement near L'Église. American divisions pressed in from all sides. The 82nd Airborne, the 30th Infantry, the 3rd Armored. These units alone had been allocated 340,000 gallons for that day. Peiper had barely 1,000. An American private joked in a letter home, We've got Krauts surrounded who ran out of gas. Captain says we use more fuel-heating coffee than they have for tanks." The statement, meant as humor, captured the brutal arithmetic of war. America fought not merely with men and guns, but with rivers of oil. Germany fought with ration books and horse carts. Even Patton's audacious Third Army pivot north, a maneuver Hitler deemed impossible, was achieved with 350,000 gallons burned in 3 days. What the Germans called fantasy, the Americans called Tuesday. By December 23rd, the skies cleared. Allied aircraft filled the heavens, thousands of sorties burning fuel at rates that would have grounded the Luftwaffe for weeks. A single squadron of Thunderbolts consumed more in an hour than Peiper's column possessed. A day of B-26 operations burned more than the Germans allocated for their spearhead. The Ardennes was not merely a battlefield, it was a showcase of industrial inequality. That night, Peiper gave the order no commander wishes to speak. Vehicles would be abandoned, fuel drained, equipment destroyed, soldiers to escape on foot. His column had begun with 119 tanks and assault guns. By the time he withdrew, 39 remained, but immobilized, husks left behind. Half-tracks, artillery, supply trucks, 177 more vehicles abandoned or destroyed. Millions of Reichsmarks in steel rendered useless not by enemy fire, but by empty tanks. Heinz Goltz, a young Panzer crewman, remembered draining the last drops into a bucket. Barely 200 gallons pooled from an entire regiment. "We burned it all, destroying our own tanks." The Obersturmbannführer stood by, silent. "We destroyed our machines with our own hands. It was as if the war itself had ended for us. Of 5,000 men, only 770 would make it back." The advance that had begun with thunder ended in silence, boots crunching over frozen snow, soldiers retreating on foot through the Ardennes. The spearhead of the Reich had been blunted not by superior strategy, but by empty fuel tanks. Word of Peiper's failure spread quickly through German command. Reports tallied American fuel: 50,000 gallons captured at Hansfeld, 2 million destroyed at Stavelot, millions more at Spa and Trois Ponts. Field Marshal Model, reading the numbers, muttered, "We are not fighting the same war." When Speer showed Hitler photographs of burning depots, the Führer dismissed them as propaganda, claiming they were Hollywood fabrications. But the soldiers knew. They had seen the truth in smoke and fire. Captured officers told interrogators what their men whispered in letters. "You throw away chocolate? We have not seen chocolate in years. You burn gasoline by the millions. We measure by liters. How can we fight such wealth?" The contrast shattered morale more than artillery barrages ever could. By December 24th, the offensive was broken. Peiper slipped away through American lines, his men trudging through snow, leaving behind the wreckage of tanks that had consumed gallons by the mile. The Americans celebrated Christmas with convoys of fuel and crates of rations. German soldiers huddled around fires, bitterly joking that Americans fed chocolate to their dogs and washed clothes in gasoline. The psychological blow was immense. The myth of German superiority, of discipline, of willpower, of Aryan destiny, collapsed against the cold reality of industrial warfare. Courage could not replace gasoline. Tactics could not replace pipelines. In the new age, victory belonged not to the boldest general, but to the largest refinery. Historians would later calculate the disparity in brutal terms. The offensive consumed 2.8 million gallons of German fuel. 40% above allocation, the excess scavenged from captured depots. In the same period, Americans consumed 267 million gallons, nearly 100 times more. The numbers spoke louder than any speech, any strategy. Field Marshal Keitel admitted at Nuremberg. By 1944, we could not move divisions for lack of fuel, while the Americans moved armies like chess pieces. Guderian confessed. When Peiper captured 50,000 gallons, it meant everything to him. But to the Americans, it meant nothing. At that moment, the war was lost, and indeed, the war ended not with a final dramatic clash of arms, but with a grinding collapse of logistics. By spring 1945, the Reich possessed more tanks on paper than it could fuel, more planes in hangars than it could fly. American bombers darkened the skies daily, each burning more gasoline than an entire German division might receive in a month. Germany's fate was sealed not on the battlefield, but in oil fields oceans away. The story of Joachim Peiper's fuel-starved column resonates beyond its tragedy. It marks the moment when the romantic notion of war, the clash of knights, the duel of generals, died beneath the weight of industry. Wars of the modern age would not be won by courage alone, but by supply chains, factories, and oil fields. By 1944, America produced half of the world's goods, a plane every 5 minutes, a tank every 7, a ship every day. In oil, the disparity was greater still. 1.8 billion barrels refined in a single year compared to Germany's meager 33 million. The Axis combined produced less than 3% of American petroleum. No tactic, no courage could bridge such a gulf. Letters from German soldiers captured in the Ardennes spoke of despair. "They fire artillery for Christmas celebrations," one wrote. "We count shells. They waste what we die to possess. This war is lost." In 1976, long after the guns had fallen silent, Peiper reflected bitterly in an interview. Finding that depot at Hansfeld was the worst thing. "For a moment we thought we had hope, but when we saw Americans burn millions at Stavelot, we understood. They had oceans, we had drops. We discovered impossibility. The Battle of the Bulge would be remembered for its snow, for Bastogne, for desperate courage on both sides. But beneath the heroics lay the arithmetic of war. Every destroyed depot, every abandoned tank, every wasted jerry-can told the same truth. Victory belonged not to the daring, but to the supplied. The Germans advanced 60 miles. They captured towns, maps, rations, and fuel. But what they truly captured was the realization that industrial war was not theirs to win. They had launched their final gamble only to learn their enemy could discard more than they could ever hope to seize. And so, in the frozen forests of Belgium, surrounded by smoke and silence, the last hopes of the Reich burned away with the gasoline they could never match. The Battle of the Bulge was not merely a defeat of arms, it was the final proof that the age of scarcity could not triumph against the age of abundance. In the end, the war was not decided in foxholes or tank duels, but in oil fields, factories, and convoys stretching across continents. America did not just outfight Germany, it outsupplied it. And in that, the fate of the Third Reich was sealed long before.